To have the Power, Works and Housing Minister Babatunde Fashola here with us, and before the break we were looking at some of those key infrastructure he's been able to put in place that will make us see a better power situation in the country. Could you continue where you left off?
Yeah, I think the additional point to make was the rural electrification in order to increase the number of people who actually have access, because most of the power supply we talk about is about the urbanized connection, people connected to the grid either on the 330, 132 kV or 3311 kV. There are communities in Nigeria who still don't have access to electricity. Now, what we plan to do is to intervene using what I call critical anchors. Those anchors are universities. Most of the universities, like global best practice, are situated in rural communities, and from there build out. Once you electrify the university, it becomes the anchor for building out independent grids. So those who were talking about mini grids and all of that, that's what was contemplated under the law in terms of rural electrification. There's also grid extension which is going on now. We're building out grids from existing anchors, make them more sustainable. You might have also heard that we recently presented business case approvals for 6 small hydro dams at the Federal Executive Council. Now that is going into public procurement through concession. Again, those are the second anchors, the small dams, because they are again in rural agrarian communities to help farming, to help agro-processing, to help heating, to help cooling, preservation of agro-produce. Again, from there you can build additional grid expansion. So all of that is work in progress that will begin to transform into results. It is taking some time to deal with this. And again, let me say, I have been in office for a year, 1 month, and I think 29 days today. And to actually, if it was just to tour the whole of Nigeria, I don't think that's enough time. So doing my paperwork, meetings, hearings in Senate, attending to visitors, going to inspect sites, it's running repairs all the way.
Let's bring him up there.
Well, 2 quick questions. The first one, you talked about having a meeting with the World Bank, especially with those who now own the power assets, members of the private sector. What's the conversation they are having with the World Bank? Because there's also the story that the federal government is trying to raise bonds in that sector, but it will look like some people prefer to be able to get some cheap funds from the outside. That's the first question. The second question is the grid. People talk about how we're able to generate a lot more than the grid can currently carry. What's the plan to ensure that the capacity of the grid as we currently have it is improved upon?
Well, I think I'll take the second one first, and I've spoken to the grid that the generalizations about the grid not being able to carry what we generate is really an inaccurate reflection of our realities. I have spoken this morning of how we have expanded the grid by additional completed works first, additional projects going on. The Kudenda substation in Kaduna is part of the grid expansion. You've seen me at various formations visiting the substation in Sokoto, in Maiduguri, in Benin, in Alagbon here in Lagos. This morning I'll be going to Ayobo. These are projects to continuously expand the grid. I was also at Ikotekpene to commission part of the switching station, and so all of these activities have moved the grid capacity as last simulated to about 7,200 megawatt today. We are not yet generating 7,200 megawatt, at least not today. What we have It's a notional 6 point something, but I don't want to go into detail. And I say that only because as at yesterday, we had about 3,600 megawatt average power on the grid. That is without what we have lost through the damage to Forcados and Escavos pipeline. So if we had, and that is another 3,000, if you add that back, if you restore that today and we can produce, evacuate and get gas, you go to over 6,000 today. So that is progress that has been made, but we have to resolve the conflict issues in the Niger Delta to be able to have access to that gas to power the turbines that are undoubtedly there. So as far as the World Bank issue is concerned, you would have heard that there are liquidity issues in the power sector. That came from the way the privatization itself was structured, essentially through bank loans. Most of the people who bought them had very little, if any, skin in the game in terms of their own private equity. So technically, I think it is not too inaccurate to say that it is the banks that are really the owners of the assets. So now that is part of the problem where those discos are carrying debts, and it is difficult now to get more money if they can't service the existing debts to banks, to expand their distribution assets, their transformers, to get more meters. Now, all of that underperformance is not necessarily only their fault. It's also the way the economy has played out. Assets they bought and loans they took at 197 or 100 and something naira to a dollar have certainly lost value. Right? We had a tariff increase to cushion that difference in terms of the obligations, but all of that was almost quickly wiped out by the depreciation in the cost of the naira to the dollar. Now, gas as a component of power production, which is the fuel that fires the turbines, is indexed in dollars, but the collection is in naira. So your bills that you could pay, if you could pay $10 with only 200 naira before, you now need 400 to pay the same, and you can't increase the tariff again to deal with that. So those are the liquidity gaps. What we have seen is that in many parts of the world where these kind of things have taken place, there has been a transitional funding support. And when we recommended it or proposed it to the World Bank, they looked in their books and they saw very correlating historical precedents that yes, government still needs to intervene, but not necessarily by giving money to the discos, but perhaps in a way, and this is unconcluded policy, perhaps in a way to help manage some of their debt, of course with certain conditions, either with governance, diminution in shares, or requiring them to recapitalize, or requiring them to take some technical expertise. Government also still has to deal with how to stabilize the value of the naira to the dollar. And again, that will be impacted by how much money we get from oil production, which is still our major foreign income earner. We have used our leverage in OPEC to get OPEC members to agree to a production cut, which has since heralded a price hike. But can we as a protagonist now take benefit if we stop fighting? Because we are budgeted at $42, excuse me, it is predicted that oil will go to about $60. So we should be having differentials in terms of benefit of about $18 per barrel of oil per day. And if we do 2 million barrels per day, you do the numbers.
You know, if you look at all of this, I think the dynamics that you just brought in concerning the amount you use in buying, gas, which is in dollars, what comes to mind readily is what is happening within the banks now, that as later as some other software, online software, you can't use your Naira card again to purchase that because they say the equivalent, your exchange rate, doesn't really make them get their required money. So it is very key that the government comes in here to see what they can do for the discos. Otherwise, I think the people just might be at the brunt. But very quickly, you talked about some other places you'll be going to.
If I may interrupt, it's not just the discos, because the discos are the face of the business that you and I know. But what they, by agreement, keep or should keep is nothing more than 25 to 30% of what they collect, because the money must then be paid through embed. And that was why embed was trying to, because that embed, the model for privatization was that there will be a bulk trader for now, until each disco can independently sign with Nyota Genko, Sulai Genko, and Makwe Genko. But we're not there yet. So a bulk trader is embed, guaranteeing to everybody that if you play by these rules, I will make sure everybody is paid. It is a bulk trader that collects the money, pays TCN, is willing charge, pays the Gencos. The Gencos are also being owed. And they are owing their gas suppliers.
The
so
IPPS.
people must be clear that when government, if government accepts the recommendation that we will make to intervene, it is not to give the discos a golden parachute.
Let's bring up Bain.
Citizens from any price hike in terms of power for now, and also to keep subsectors within the sector playing so that they don't lose their businesses.
Okay.
What is the preferred method for intervention? Is the federal government thinking about bonds, or are they thinking of looking outside?
Well, as I said, the much I can share now is what we have done in terms of really looking at the entire system and seeing what needs to be done. How do we fund meters? How do we reduce the debt? How do we make the system viable? What is the transition time? Is it another 3 years during which everybody must play and sink or swim? Because there must be a time when that child must leave the worker and really work. Now, these are policy matters that I cannot unilaterally decide. My team and I are looking at a lot of options, and we will present that to our employers, the federal government, to make a decision. The executive arm of government won't decide this alone, because it would have financial consequences also for the national economy.